connectivity. It is our hope that the Afghan authorities would be responsive to the international community's expectations regarding inclusivity, respect for human rights for all Afghans, including women, and take effective actions against terrorism. For its part, the international community must be actively engaged in preventing a humanitarian crisis. We also believe that the release of Afghanistan's financial assets would be crucial in stabilizing the economy and giving it sustainability. This is all the more important as the world's attention and resources are currently focused on the Ukrainian crisis. It is essential that the people of Afghanistan also receive the world's attention. I assured the Foreign Minister of Pakistan's continued support to foreign governments, the EU and international organizations engaged in evacuation of their personnel from Afghanistan. We have facilitated the evacuation of over 90,000 people belonging to 24 countries and international organizations so far in the earlier phases. The ongoing conflict in the Ukraine was also discussed. Pakistan has continuously emphasized the principles of the United Nations Charter, including self-determination of peoples, non-use or threat of use of force, respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, and peaceful settlement of disputes. Pakistan remains concerned about the well-being of the Ukrainian people. Reports of civilian casualties, massive outflow of refugees, and internally displacement of peoples are disturbing. In solidarity with the people of Ukraine, Pakistan has sent 4 plane loads of relief assistance, including medicine and food items. The Ukrainian conflict has shown how interlinked today's world is, as ramifications of a conflict on the European continent are being felt in Pakistan in the form of rising fuel and food prices. Since the conflict started, we have been in regular contact with the leadership of Ukraine and Russia, as well as the European Union and other European partners, urging continued dialogue and diplomacy in the pursuit of peace. We once again emphasize the indispensability of the immediate cessation of hostilities and constructive engagement. Pakistan fervently hopes that a solution would be found through dialogue and diplomacy at the earliest possible. We also discussed the continuing human rights violations in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the rising tide of Islamophobia across India, and risks posed by the developments for regional as well as international peace and security. In the latest incidents, derogatory remarks made by 2 senior officials of India's ruling BJP party about the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, deeply offended the sentiments not only of Muslims in Pakistan, Muslims within India, but Muslims across the world. And I emphasize that sustainable peace in South Asia remains contingent upon the peaceful resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute in accordance with the relevant UNSC resolutions and the wishes of the Kashmiri people. Pakistan has close cooperations with Germany in a number of areas, and we desire to expand it further to other areas of mutual benefit of our 2 countries. I conclude by thanking the Foreign Minister for her visit, and I look forward to continuing to work with her towards regional peace and for further deepening our bilateral ties. I will now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Germany.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Excellency, dear colleague. Thank you very much for the friendly and warm welcome here in Islamabad. We are meeting today in a time of multiple crises. The Taliban, as you have mentioned, have brought incredible suffering and hunger to the people in Afghanistan. But the crisis has consequences far beyond its borders, and no country has felt the impact more severely than your country, than Pakistan. Furthermore, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not only threatening the foundations of our international order, Russia's restriction on wheat exports and its siege of Ukrainian ports have sent food prices skyrocketing. Few countries import more wheat from both Russia and Ukraine than Pakistan. And the climate crisis is the biggest threat and the greatest challenge for humanity as a whole in the 21st century. And it is affecting our countries already. These crises mutually reinforce each other, and therefore we cannot deal with them separately, but we must tackle them all at the same time. We have to work together and support each other, and this is also why I'm here today. Today we discussed at length the situation in Afghanistan. Over the last years and decades, millions of people fled Afghanistan in search for a better and safer life. Successive governments and the Pakistani people have shown a big heart by selflessly welcoming these people inside your borders and by providing them with food, shelter, and a chance for a better future. I know that this was not always easy. It is an enormous task that Pakistan is shouldering on behalf of the whole international community, and it deserves our solidarity and support. I came here today to tell you we see your engagement, and Germany remains committed to continuing our support for Pakistani host communities along with people who had to flee Afghanistan. We want to work together with your government, the Pakistani people, and our international partners to improve their living conditions and provide access to education and decent health care. When we look across the border, the situation is dire, and as you have mentioned, the Taliban are leading the country into a downfall. Parents do not know how to feed their children. Girls are deprived of their right to education. Women are almost excluded from participation in public life. Dissenting voices are brutally suppressed. The economy is grinding to a halt. The international community must stand united and together tell the Taliban loud and clear, you are heading in the wrong direction. As long as they go down this path, there's no room for normalization and even less for recognition of the Taliban as the legitimate rulers of the country. At the same time, we will not forget and we will not abandon the people of Afghanistan. It is not the fault of the people that the Taliban government overthrew the government and since then have tightened their grip on the Afghan society. We will continue to provide humanitarian aid and support the people who need it the most, especially women and girls who suffer more than anyone else under the Taliban's rule. And there's another important personal concern to me. Afghans who have worked for German institutions or committed themselves to the democratic cause and human rights deserve our protection. Pakistan has been our closest and most reliable partner in this regard. Through our close cooperation over the last months, more than 14,000 Afghans who are particularly at risk could travel via Pakistan to Germany to start a new life in safety and without fear. So most of all, I'm here to say thank you. Thank you to Pakistan, thank you to the Pakistani people. We are really grateful for all the support you have given us. I very much hope that we will continue our successful cooperation and find ways to help those still remaining in their difficult situation. These past months have shown how much we can achieve when we work together, and I hope we can apply this to other areas and deepen and strengthen our bilateral relations. As I said in the beginning, we cannot deal with the different crises separately. They are interlinked and we have to work together. Russia's war of aggression sets a dangerous precedent, not only for Europe, but for the whole world. Our world will be a much more dangerous place if the law of the strongest applies and not international law. Therefore, we all must stand by Ukraine and defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty with words and actions. When it comes to the climate crisis, we are all living in the same house and the roof is already on fire. We are running out of time and have now to act. Both of our still relatively new governments have made this topic a priority. And I hope that Pakistan, as G77 chair, will participate at the Petersburg Climate Dialogue, which we are co-hosting with Egypt in July in Berlin. Last year, Germany and Pakistan established a joint climate and energy partnership. We want to build on this partnership, move forward with the energy transition, and lift our bilateral climate cooperation to the next level. We also discussed opportunities for increased trade and investment between our countries, particularly in the field of renewable energy. I'm convinced that successful economic integration depends on common values and standards. That is why, with regard to EU trade preferences, full implementation of human rights commitments is crucial. I will also have the opportunity to discuss this with civil society representatives later today. Experience shows in your country, in my country, that women's rights are an important indicator for the state of human rights and for well-being in a society as a whole. That is why I'm looking forward to visiting a police station focused on combating gender-based violence tomorrow. Dear colleague, Excellencies, faced with multiple crises, we only have a fighting chance if we exchange ideas, discuss openly and frank, and cooperate closely. I'm optimistic that our meeting today has laid the groundwork for our successful cooperation in the future, and thank you again for the warm welcome here in Islamabad.
Thank you, foreign ministers. The ministers would have time to take a couple of questions. I propose to take questions alternatively from our colleagues from Germany and Pakistan. And let me start by giving the question to a gentleman on the right. Please introduce yourself and also to whom you are addressing the question.
Yeah, my name is Jörg Lang from a German press agency, DPA, and the first question goes to Ms. Baerbock. What can be done to help the people of Afghanistan while increasing pressure on Taliban at the same time? And the second question to Mr. Sardari. Al-Qaeda can once again operate from Afghanistan. So what can Pakistan do about it to fight the terrorism in Afghanistan? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. It is crucial that the Taliban hear the same message from all of us, and that's why we discussed the situation in Afghanistan very extensively. We are facing a humanitarian disaster, and this is also why we, both countries, continue to provide humanitarian aid, because we cannot let people starve. But anything else above humanitarian aid must be strictly conditionalized. We see, in my point of view, that the Taliban are heading towards the wrong direction, and therefore it is also crucial that economic supports need to be conditionalized with regard to the basic rights of the people. But this is also part of foreign policy. We have to be very honest. Our influence on what happens inside Afghanistan is very limited. It depends on the Taliban making rational choices in their own economic interest. And that is not what they are doing right now, and therefore we are supporting the people of Afghanistan with humanitarian relief and bringing out those who are endangered by their life.
I'm going to address all three of your questions because I think it highlights sort of the main expectations from Pakistan and the international community from Afghanistan. One is dealing with the humanitarian economic crisis, and then, as you said, terrorist activity from Afghanistan vis-a-vis Al-Qaeda. We have in Pakistan been facing the brunt of terrorism and extremism over the past many decades, and so have, of course, the people of Afghanistan. It is in our interest and in the world's interest that there is a peaceful and stable Afghanistan that does not have its soil used for terrorist activities within the international, within the region or anywhere else in the world. There are questions as far as the capacity of the new regime to tackle this problem, and it is important for us to engage with them, as far as our security concerns are concerned, or terrorist activity from any group impacting any country is concerned. But what I must emphasize is that Pakistan is not only a victim of terrorism. I am a victim of terrorism. And I am a victim of terrorism and terrorist groups that operated in my country and operated in another country. But when I plead the case for humanitarian assistance for Afghanistan, for the people of Afghanistan, or when I plead the case of us all working together to try and ensure that we halt the complete and utter collapse of the economy in Afghanistan, that is in spite of or regardless of my views or whoever else's view, anybody else's views vis-a-vis the regime that is imposed in Afghanistan at the moment. It is because we're particularly concerned about the consequences of a humanitarian crisis of this scale on our border. With the United Nations saying that 97% of the people of Afghanistan will descend below the poverty line, where the families in Afghanistan, through no fault of their own, are facing starvation. I believe we must work closely with the international community and with the Muslim world to help avert a humanitarian crisis and to help avert a total economic collapse, so that we can be in a better position to ensure that the Afghan regime lives up to the international commitments, so that we can create the environment that reduces and does not increase the chance of terrorist activity, and so that we can emphasize with the Afghan government, with the Afghan regime, that they must live up to their commitments to the international community. They must live up to their commitments to the people of Afghanistan, and that includes the women and children in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Can we have a question from the back here, left side?
Thank you very much. This is Shaukat Paracha from Aaj Television. My question to the young, dynamic, and the youngest Foreign Minister of Pakistan, His Excellency Bilawal Bhutto is that it's heartening to note that you are reaching out to the major capitals and interacting with the world leaders. What has been their response in the policies that you are pursuing? Because every time there is something, the foreign policy is pointed out in one or the other way. And Honorable Foreign Minister of Germany, thank you very much for coming over. We are so excited that our director, one official, is wearing a dupatta containing the German flag. Right now, she's sitting over there. My question to you is, you repeatedly talked about the international law vis-a-vis Ukraine, but what is the applicability of the international law, humanitarian principles, in case of Kashmir? Why the global powers are silent? Why there is no voice about the rising Islamophobia in India, as you have seen the recent outrage in the entire Muslim world about the comments, whatever they have been made by the spokesperson of the ruling party? Why the word is silent? Thank you.
Should I start with your... I'll start with your first question. Shukriya Paracha Sahab, thank you very much. I've only been in the this office for a little bit over a month now, but our priority in 3 words is engagement, engagement, engagement. We feel that if you don't talk with the world, if you don't engage the world, you can't put across Pakistan's view, you can't convince them, their societies, their leaders, their parliamentarians, their civil society. If Pakistan refuses to engage the world, then we must forget about being able to convince the world and achieve our objectives on a foreign policy front. Other than that, my priority is to focus on economic relations. We're working towards a pivot in Pakistan's diplomacy, towards economic diplomacy. We're encouraging a reset of our relationship with countries across the board, given the transition in government, and we're focusing on a more nuanced foreign policy, but our emphasis is trade over aid. Our emphasis is enhancing economic cooperation. As I mentioned earlier today, Germany and Pakistan's economic bilateral relations are great, but we want to get more out of our relationships. And the major priority for me as Foreign Minister of Pakistan is how can I ease the economic difficulties of my people? And on the main agendas on our list on that front is the FATF restrictions, the FATF restrictions that are causing a drag, an unnecessary drag on the Pakistani economy in difficult times, the GSP plus status that Pakistan had won with Europe in previous governments. We're very keen to see that that status is extended, and the Pakistani businesses and Pakistan, the Pakistani economy can benefit from these. From this opportunity. So these are my priorities, and as far as the India question is concerned, I'll allow Foreign Minister to respond.
Thanks for your kind words, and thanks for the question. The foundation of the United Nations is that human rights are indivisible, and this counts for every region in the world. This also counts for Kashmir. This counts for women's rights. This counts for minority rights and also religious rights. And therefore, we support the work of the United Nations, also with the situation in Kashmir, to ensure that all the human rights are being guaranteed within the different bodies of the United Nations. We are not part of the Security Council, as you know, but within the work also of the Human Rights Commission and of the Special Envoy. And we believe that a constructive approach from both sides and confidence-building measures are the only way forward to improve the relationships between Pakistan and India. The bilateral agreement to implement the ceasefire along the line of control last year was a positive step. We also discussed it in our talks earlier on. We believe that more steps should follow this line, and I think it's really a strength of different governments if there's a provocation that one doesn't react but really stands to its own and the international principles.
Thank you. Can we have a question from the lady here in the middle?
Hello, Daniela Fatis from the newspaper network Redaktionsnetzwerk Deutschland. I want to address the topic of Afghan refugees. There's still a couple of thousand refugees officially eligible for coming to Germany. Did you agree on a way and on a time when these people can come to Germany, and how is Pakistan helping with that? Could they all be transferred, by example, through Pakistan? And also, sir, what do you expect in exchange from Germany for helping in this issue? And Ms. Baerbock, humanitarian organizations do criticize that the conditions for being able to come to Germany for Afghans are too strict, are too narrow. Is there any? Are there any plans to widen these possibilities? And one last question, if I may, as you addressed the Ukraine war, and I didn't quite understand what you were saying. Is Pakistan now condemning Russia's attack on Ukraine? And do you ask Russia to withdraw its troops?
Thank you for your questions. I'll start with the Afghan refugees. Pakistan has a long history in hosting Afghan refugees and helping with the refugee crisis as a fallout of the first conflict. And unfortunately, the threat of a major refugee fallout not only for Pakistan but for the international community if the humanitarian and economic crisis increases is extremely grave. We've been from day one, from before the fall of Kabul, after the fall of Kabul, and up until this point, we're working with many countries within the EU, the international community, and anyone and everyone really who are working around the clock to either get their citizens or those who worked with them to their countries. And we're hoping that the third phase of our for these transit refugees from Afghanistan to Germany will happen very, very soon. And at the moment, as we speak, I believe that there's something, there's a procedural, the summary on this issue is being circulated in our cabinet, so it should be only a matter of time that we can move forward on the third phase of the transit Afghan refugees. As far as what Pakistan expects in exchange, we expect nothing. In exchange from the EU or Germany, we're doing this on the basis of what we feel is our responsibility to the international community and to the people in Afghanistan who faced a whole host of issues, and we want to do whatever we can to mitigate their difficulties. What I would say to the German media, to the German people, to the European people, is to remember, to understand, recall, and highlight the fact that Pakistan not only now is playing an outsized role as far as mitigating the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, despite our own economic foes. We are going above and beyond to help everybody with their refugee or sort of the transit refugees, and this is the face of Pakistan, a modern Muslim nation playing a responsible role on the world stage. And don't see Pakistan in the way that perhaps these groups that we all have our own views on would that the impression or the perception that Pakistan has in the international media is often colored by the activities of these groups rather than the activities of the people of Pakistan. As far as Ukraine is concerned, Pakistan has not changed its position. Pakistan has a nuanced position. We don't want to get dragged into any conflict, but we are steadfast in our support for the United Nations resolutions. We are all part of the United Nations, and it is in Pakistan's interest. It is in our interest, as a small country, as a developing country, that international laws are followed, that international institutions are followed, that international law is followed. But we don't want to be dragged in to any conflict, particularly given that we've just experienced decade after decade of conflict in Afghanistan. And the people in my country would like to share our experience with the people of Ukraine, the people of Russia, and the people of Europe, that ultimately all conflicts have to resolve through dialogue. And we hope that dialogue and diplomacy will be the tools that we use in pursuit of peace. Of course, one can't ignore the humanitarian crisis facing the people in Ukraine, the difficulties and the atrocities faced by the people of Ukraine. And it is because of that that once again, despite Pakistan's own extremely difficult economic situation, we have sent, I believe, 4 flight loads of humanitarian assistance to the people of Ukraine. But as far as our position is concerned, we will continue to advocate for dialogue and diplomacy in the pursuit of peace.
Coming back to the part addressed to myself, first of all, we really appreciate the support of Pakistan, as I've said before, especially as His Excellency has underlined that this is not a question of bargaining, but a question of humanitarian aid and supporting the citizens of Afghanistan. We have had a very good discussion today, and we received very positive signals that we can continue successfully with the cooperation we have had in the past. We had also restructured, as your question was addressed, we restructured our system, how we will make the transition time in Pakistan, but also in other countries, shorter, to ensure that Afghans will not stay in Pakistan longer than necessary. This is also a question of digitalized visas, and we organized everything that people can swiftly travel to Germany. So far, not a single person from our list transitioning through Pakistan failed to travel on to Germany, and we are continuing on this path. And as you have mentioned, NGOs, this was also a reason why a couple of NGOs joined me on my travel here to see how we can work closely together. This is also something new in the work of the Foreign Ministry together with the Interior Ministry of Germany, that we have a very close relation with NGOs to help also on practical matters to enable to bring out not only the people most in danger who have worked for German institutions or who have faced, especially women and journalists and human rights defenders, with threats by their lives, to not only bring out them but also their family members in an unbureaucratic way.
Thank you. I think the ministers have responded at length to questions. Maybe one last question from the back, Mr. Heather.
Thank you, Mateen Heather, GTV. Question to Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. You said that it's a time to pursue diplomacy and to resolve conflicts through peaceful means. So the first question is in the context of regional peace. And you have said you have more than 1 month in power and taking so many initiatives, economic and other. Are you taking any initiative to resolve Jammu and Kashmir issue, and any hope for the resumption of dialogue with India so that these all issues could be addressed through dialogue and talks? And beyond writing letters to different international organizations on rising Islamophobia in India, what other steps could be taken to bring India under pressure to stop these things? And to German Honorable Foreign Minister, of course, you might have sought Pakistan's support on Ukraine. Pakistan has no other options to go for economic cooperation with Russia and with China. Would you propose and suggest what are the other alternate means of getting economic cooperation, energy, trade, and these all things? When Pakistan gets closer to Russia and China, of course, this is not acceptable to the Western community. So Pakistan doesn't have any other option. So on this front, how Germany, being an economic part of Europe, could assist and cooperate with Pakistan? Thank you so much.
Thank you for all your questions. I'm going to start from the end and go back. Pakistan wants to engage with the entire world. We are neighbors with China. We have a long-standing relationship with them. Lekin jaise aapko pata hai, you must know that Pakistan has played a very unique role within the context of China and international cooperation. In fact, Pakistan's role in establishing diplomatic relations between China and the United States is now part of history. We played a very important role in increasing cooperation, increasing engagement, and in fact establishing those diplomatic relations. So today I see Pakistan's role as not trying to aggravate any regional conflict or any conflict at all. We want to continue our engagement, but also play that role as a bridge. And from our perspective, from our national security interest, from our security interest, from our country's perspective, from the interest of our region, it serves all our interests. It serves the interests of Pakistan, it serves the interest of everyone in our neighborhood. That instead of increasing conflicts, moving towards more of a new Cold War order, that we could engage in dialogue, in diplomacy, in the pursuit of dispute resolution, decreasing conflict rather than increasing conflict. As far as Kashmir is concerned, as you said, I've only been in this job for a month now, but I don't believe there's been a single meeting where the issue faced by our Kashmiri brothers and sisters have not been addressed. Whether it is at the United Nations, and I'm speaking within the context of food insecurity, whether at Davos, whether in China, whether standing next to Secretary Blinken or the various foreign ministers that we've managed to engage with, or indeed today with the Honorable Foreign Minister of Germany, we have consistently and persistently advocated for the resolution of the issues faced by the Kashmiri people, and with a particular emphasis on the fact that the situation has deteriorated. The space for practical peace and dialogue has deteriorated, not by an action of Pakistan, not by from our side, but by unilateral provocative actions from the Indian side. Whether you talk about the August 2019 events which undermine the internationally disputed status of the region of Kashmir, whether we talk about the process that started in August 2019 of allowing non-Kashmiris to settle and buy property in Kashmir and begin the process of undermining the Muslim majority, disempowering the Muslim majority, whether we talk about the May 5th so-called Elimination Commission, there was in fact an artificial gerrymandering exercise to once again disempower, disenfranchise the Muslim majority and artificially turn them into a minority. We consistently advocate for our Kashmiri brothers and sisters, and we believe that the provocative statements, Islamophobic statements emanating out of officials of the Indian governing party yesterday are absolutely outrageous. And this is an action that is condemnable, not only by the Muslims of India, not only by the Muslims of Pakistan, not only by the Muslims of Kashmir, but the Muslims all over the world. It exposes the Indian facade of a secular democratic nation. They are no longer, if they are unable to apologize, if they are unable to take appropriate action, then it is further proof that this is no longer secular India. This is Hindutva India. This is Hinduism superiority in India. And that colors our diplomatic relations. For the people of Pakistan need peace with India. The people of Pakistan need peace with all our neighbors. But for us to be able to talk about peace, we have to talk with a rational actor, with an India that believes in engagement, which believes in equal rights for all citizens or all players regardless of their religion, regardless of their ethnicity. And if provocative statements such as yesterday, provocative actions such as August 2019 and May 5th continue to happen, then that space will continue to decrease.
To the part of your question, in this situation, the whole world is facing the consequences of the Russian war, because it's a hybrid war. It's not only a war by bombs and tanks which are being thrown and which are invading Ukraine, with many, many people dying every day. It's a hybrid war which is also being led by a corn war, by a war of disinformation around the world, and therefore I would like to make very clear that there's not a single sanction on nutrition, on health, or on corn. The opposite. There are only sanctions which hit the system of the Russian regime, and therefore I also personally, as a chair of G7, are doing everything to counter the effects which, especially with regard to corn, hit countries like yours, especially because much of the grain and the corn comes from Ukraine and Russia. And therefore we are trying everything to bring out the corn of Ukraine, different ways via train, and also analyzing if there's an option of the port. But the most easiest way would be that Russia would stop the bombing and would stop shooting at Mariupol port, so the world could be could be saved again with regard to the Corn War. We also see a responsibility of everybody who believes in international law to cooperate together with regard to energy prices, with regard to prices for food. That's why we increased our donations with regard to food towards the poorest countries in the world. This is why we are also looking how other countries can export corn right now. And this is also why I'm going next week to the Gulf states to see how we can work together on the big challenge of energy prices. But also here, as in other situations, if we have all the same message towards Russia, underlying that the easiest way to end this war in Ukraine, but also the consequences, would to end the breach of international law by bombing Ukraine.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you, everybody. Bahut shukriya.